In 1937, Nanjing was one of the most beautiful cities in Asia. Markets full, streets loud with life, children running through stone alleyways that had stood for 600 years. It was the capital of China, a city of 1 million people who had no idea that within weeks, their names would be erased from history. Not by plague, not by earthquake, not by any force of nature, by a decision, made in a room, by men in uniform, who looked at a city full of living human beings and chose what came next. This is not a story about war. Every war has soldiers. Every war has casualties. This is a story about what happens when the rules of war are deliberately thrown away. When commanding officers give permission for the unthinkable. When an army stops fighting soldiers and starts hunting civilians. And what makes this story even more disturbing is how long the world tried to pretend it never happened. Decades. And in some places, the denial is still happening right now. By December 1937, the Japanese Imperial Army had been advancing through China for months. City after city had fallen, and with each city that fell, reports began filtering out. Reports that were too disturbing to publish, too extreme to believe. The Chinese nationalist government looked at those reports and made a catastrophic miscalculation. They believed Nanjing was protected by its walls, by international presence, by the basic assumption that a modern army would follow the rules of engagement that the world had agreed upon. They were wrong about all of it. On December 9th, Japanese commanders issued an ultimatum. Surrender Nanjing within 24 hours, or face the consequences. The Chinese garrison did not surrender. On December 13th, 1937, the Japanese Imperial Army entered the city. What followed was not a battle. The soldiers who could have fought back had already retreated. The people left inside those walls were shopkeepers, teachers, grandmothers, children, families who had nowhere to go and trusted that the city would hold. They were wrong. What the Japanese army did inside Nanjing over the next 6 weeks has a name: the Nanjing Massacre, also called the Rape of Nanjing, and the scale of it is almost impossible to process with a calm mind. In the first weeks alone, historians estimate that between 200,000 and 300,000 Chinese civilians were killed. Not in crossfire, not as collateral damage. Deliberately, orders were given, carried out, documented by the soldiers themselves. Photographs taken, diaries written, competitions held, yes, competitions between officers to see who could kill the most people in the shortest amount of time. And those competitions were reported in Japanese newspapers. With pride. This was not a secret kept from the Japanese public in 1937. It was celebrated. Inside the city, a small group of Western businessmen and missionaries did something extraordinary. They established an international safety zone, a protected area of roughly 4 square kilometers, and refused to leave. A German businessman named John Rabe led the effort. A Nazi party member who used his swastika armband to shield Chinese civilians from Japanese soldiers. History does not always give us clean heroes. Sometimes the person standing between a crowd and death is the last person you would have chosen. That safety zone sheltered somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 survivors. Without it, the death toll would have been higher still. But outside those boundaries, the city was unrecognizable. Entire neighborhoods emptied. Streets that had been full of vendors and school children stood silent. Personal belongings scattered across stone roads. Doors left open mid-flight. The kind of stillness that only exists when something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. 6 weeks. That is how long the massacre continued at full scale. 6 weeks in which the outside world received reports, discussed them in diplomatic channels, and largely did nothing. Because Nanjing was in China. And in 1937, what happened inside China was considered China's problem. When the war ended in 1945, the world finally turned its attention to what had happened in that city. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East, the Tokyo War Crimes Trials, prosecuted Japanese commanders for what occurred in Nanjing. General Owain Matsui, who commanded the forces that entered the city, was found guilty and executed in 1948. But here is where the story takes a turn that most history books skip past. Japan's formal acknowledgement of what happened in Nanjing has never been clean, never been complete. For decades after the war, Japanese government officials, textbooks, and public figures cycled through a pattern of partial admission, retraction, and denial that continues to this day. Some Japanese politicians have called the massacre exaggerated. Some have questioned the death toll. Some have visited shrines that honor convicted war criminals as national heroes, and have done so while serving in government office. China and Japan have fought over this history in diplomatic meetings, in school curriculum battles, in United Nations proceedings. The survivors, the men and women who were children in Nanjing in December 1937, spent their entire lives waiting for an acknowledgement that never fully came. Think about what that means for a moment. You survived something that killed hundreds of thousands of people around you. You rebuilt your life from nothing. And then you watched the country responsible slowly rewrite what happened until your own suffering became a debate, a controversy, a number to be questioned rather than a life to be honored. There is a memorial in Nanjing today, the Memorial Hall of the Victims in Nanjing Massacre by Japanese invaders. Its walls carry the names of the documented dead. School children visit it. Elderly survivors once stood inside it and wept. Most of those survivors are gone now. The last living witnesses to what happened inside those walls are dying one by one. And when the last of them is gone, this story will exist only in documents, in photographs, and in whether or not people like you choose to keep it alive. Because that is what erasure looks like in the modern world. It does not always come with fire. Sometimes it comes with silence, with distraction, with the slow passage of time and the assumption that someone else is making sure the world remembers. Nobody is doing that automatically. Memory requires effort. It requires people who refuse to let important things disappear just because they are uncomfortable. 200,000 people, minimum, in 6 weeks, in a city that trusted it would be protected. Their story did not end in December 1937. It ends the last time someone tells it. And right now, most people scrolling through their phones today have never heard this story. They do not know the name Nanjing. They do not know what happened inside those walls. They have never heard of John Rabe or the safety zone or the Tokyo trials or the decades of denial that followed. That gap between what happened and what people actually know is exactly how history gets buried. If this video made you stop and think, share it. Right now, not later. Now. Because the person who needs to see this probably will not find it on their own. Drop a comment below with one word that describes how this made you feel. Just one word. Because I want to know that you watched this all the way to the end and that it meant something. And if you are new here, this channel exists for exactly this reason. To find the history that was buried and bring it back into the light. Follow so you never miss what comes next. Because next week, we are going into something even deeper. Something that involves a cover-up that lasted not 6 weeks, not 6 years, but 6 decades. And the people responsible never spent a single day in prison. You are going to want to be here for that one.